You have arrived here not by chance, but by the silent call of something ancient stirring within your depths. Something that has been waiting, patient as stone, for the moment when your gentleness would no longer be enough. When your endless giving would finally crack open to reveal what lies beneath the soft surface of your empathic nature. Today, we speak not of sensitivity as weakness, but of the alchemical transformation that turns the wounded healer into something far more powerful, the warrior. But this is not the warrior of conquest or domination. This is the warrior of the soul, forged in the fires of psychological awakening. The one who has descended into their own underworld and emerged not with a sword, but with something infinitely sharper: truth, discernment, the capacity to feel deeply without drowning, to love fiercely without losing themselves. You see, there exists a profound misunderstanding about the nature of empathy in our collective consciousness. We speak of empaths as if they were delicate flowers, forever at the mercy of others' emotional storms. But this is only the first stage, the chrysalis phase of a much deeper transformation. What I have observed through decades of analytical work is that the empath, when properly awakened, becomes one of the most formidable psychological forces in human experience. The transformation begins in silence, in the sacred space between breaths, in the moment when the empath finally asks the question that changes everything. Why do I feel responsible for everyone else's pain except my own? This question, simple as it appears, is a key that unlocks the door to the shadow realm where the true work begins. In my exploration of the collective unconscious, I have encountered a recurring archetype that emerges specifically within those who possess empathic gifts. I call it the wounded warrior, and it represents the inevitable evolution of the sensitive soul who has been tested by life's cruelties. This archetype does not emerge from books or meditation retreats. It is forged in the crucible of real suffering, real betrayal, real loss. When the empath finally realizes that their kindness has been weaponized against them, that their compassion has been exploited, that their light has been used to illuminate everyone else's path while they stumbled in darkness. The first phase of this transformation is what I term the great refusal. It begins when the empath looks into the mirror of their relationships and sees not love, but extraction, not appreciation, but expectation, not reciprocity, but a one-way flow of energy that leaves them hollow, resentful, and spiritually bankrupt. This recognition does not come gently. It arrives like lightning, sudden and blinding, illuminating years of unconscious patterns in a single moment of terrible clarity. In the dreams of empaths undergoing this transformation, certain symbols appear with striking consistency: the burning house that cannot be saved, the drowning child who refuses rescue, the wounded animal that bites the hand that feeds it. These are not random images from the unconscious. They are precise communications from the psyche, warning that the old patterns must die for the new self to be born. I recall a patient of mine, a woman in her 40s, who had spent her entire life as what others called the strong one. She came to me exhausted, depleted, speaking of a recurring dream where she stood in a field of wilting flowers, trying desperately to water them all, while her own roots withered from neglect. In the dream, she would cry out for someone to tend to her, but her voice made no sound. This dream, I told her, was not about flowers. It was about the soul's desperate plea for recognition, for care, for the radical act of self-preservation. The empath in transformation begins to experience something unprecedented in their emotional landscape: anger. Not the hot, explosive rage of the unconscious, but the cold, clear anger of the awakened soul. This anger is sacred because it finally says no to what has been destroying them. It refuses to carry what was never theirs. It demands respect for the boundaries that were trampled in the name of love. But here we must be careful, for anger without consciousness becomes the shadow that devours. The empath who has awakened to their exploitation may swing too far in the opposite direction, becoming hard, cynical, closed. They may mistake emotional unavailability for strength, isolation for independence. This is not the warrior's path. This is simply another form of unconsciousness. The true warrior empath learns to weaponize their sensitivity, not against others, but in service of truth. They develop what I call psychic discernment, the ability to feel into a situation without being consumed by it, to sense the unspoken dynamics in a room without taking responsibility for fixing them, to witness suffering without assuming it is theirs to heal. This discernment manifests in practical ways that would seem impossible to the uninitiated. The warrior empath can detect deception not through paranoia, but through energetic reading. They sense the gap between someone's words and their true intentions. They feel the manipulation before it fully forms. They recognize the psychic signature of those who seek to drain rather than exchange energy. Let me share another case that illustrates this transformation. A young man came to my practice describing himself as cursed with too much feeling. He would enter crowded spaces and immediately become overwhelmed by what he described as the noise of everyone's inner chaos. He had begun to isolate himself, believing his sensitivity to be a burden he must bear alone. Through our work together, he discovered that his overwhelming experiences were not due to excess sensitivity, but to lack of boundaries. He had never learned to distinguish between his emotional experience and that of others. As we explored his childhood, we uncovered the origin of this boundary collapse. Raised by a mother struggling with depression and a father who had emotionally abandoned the family, he had learned to read the atmospheric atmosphere as a survival mechanism. His sensitivity had developed not as a gift, but as a necessary adaptation to an unstable environment. This understanding was crucial to his transformation from overwhelmed empath to conscious warrior. The process of reclaiming boundaries is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the empath's journey toward warriorhood. For so long, they have derived their sense of worth from their ability to feel and heal others. The prospect of setting limits feels like a betrayal of their essential nature. But this is where the deepest teaching lies. True empathy is not the absorption of another's pain. True empathy is the capacity to witness and understand without losing oneself in the process. In my clinical work, I have observed that empaths who complete this transformation develop an almost supernatural ability to cut through psychological defenses, not to harm, but to heal. They can speak to someone's shadow without triggering their defenses because they have made peace with their own darkness. They become mirrors that reflect not what people want to see, but what they need to see for their own evolution. The warrior empath understands that boundaries are not walls, but membranes, permeable enough to allow genuine connection, strong enough to filter out what is toxic or inappropriate. They learn to give from overflow rather than deficit, to help from choice rather than compulsion, to love from wholeness
rather than need.
But perhaps most importantly, they develop what I call the sacred no. This is not the reactive no of the wounded child, nor the defensive no of the threatened ego. This is the conscious no of the individuated soul, spoken with such clarity and authority that it needs no justification or apology. It simply is, like a mountain or an ocean, impossible to move or manipulate. I have witnessed this sacred no in action countless times. A client who had spent years in an abusive marriage finally looked her husband in the eye and said simply, "No more." Not with drama, not with explanation, just with the unshakable certainty of someone who had finally remembered their own worth. The power in that moment was palpable, transformative not just for her, but for everyone in their orbit who witnessed the birth of her authentic power. The transformation deepens when the empath realizes that their sensitivity, properly channeled, is not a liability, but a superpower. They can read the emotional field of any environment and navigate it with precision. They can sense the health of relationships, organizations, even communities by tuning into the subtle energetic currents that most people remain unconscious of. This ability, when wielded by a conscious warrior, becomes a form of energetic martial arts. They can deflect negative energy without absorbing it. They can redirect aggression without becoming aggressive. They can maintain their center in the midst of chaos without disconnecting from their heart. They become what the Taoists call the immovable center, the eye of the storm that remains calm while everything around it moves. The development of this centered presence requires what I call the sacred descent. The empath must journey into their own underworld, confronting not only the wounds inflicted by others, but their own shadow material. They must face their hidden resentments, their secret superiority, their unconscious manipulations. For every empath carries within them not only light, but shadow. And until that shadow is acknowledged and integrated, their transformation remains incomplete. In dreams, this descent is often represented by images of caves, underground passages, dark waters. The dreamer finds themselves navigating these depths, sometimes afraid, sometimes determined, always moving towards some unseen destination. These are not nightmares to be escaped, but initiatory journeys to be embraced. The treasures found in these depths become the weapons of the warrior, tools of discernment and strength that cannot be taken away. The warrior empath also develops a relationship with solitude that is fundamentally different from the isolation of the wounded. They no longer flee into aloneness to escape overwhelming stimuli. Instead, they seek solitude as a place of restoration and renewal. They understand that their sensitivity requires regular periods of energetic cleansing, just as the body requires rest and the mind requires quiet. In these periods of sacred solitude, the warrior empath connects with what I call the inner council, the collection of archetypal energies that guide and protect the individuated soul. The wise elder who offers perspective, the divine child who maintains wonder, the great mother who provides unconditional love, the fierce protector who guards the boundaries of the sacred self. This inner council becomes the empath's primary source of validation and guidance. They no longer seek approval from the external world because they have found the ultimate authority within. This does not make them arrogant or disconnected. Rather, it makes them more genuinely available to others because they are no longer desperately seeking from others what they can only find within themselves. The establishment of this inner authority is perhaps the most radical aspect of the transformation. In a world that teaches empaths to look outward for validation, to measure their worth by their usefulness to others, the development of inner knowing is nothing short of revolutionary. It requires the empath to trust themselves more than they trust the opinions of others, to value their inner experience more than external approval. This shift in orientation creates ripple effects throughout every aspect of the empath's life. Relationships that were built on the foundation of the empath's self-sacrifice begin to crumble, while new connections based on mutual respect and reciprocity begin to form. Career choices shift from people-pleasing professions to work that genuinely serves the empath's sole purpose. Even daily routines transform as the empath learns to honor their own rhythms rather than adapting constantly to others' needs. The warrior empath learns to trust their intuition, not as a vague feeling, but as a precise instrument of perception. They understand that their body is constantly gathering information from the environment and translating it into physical sensations, emotional responses, and intuitive knowing. They learn to read these signals like a language, developing fluency in the communication between their conscious mind and their deeper wisdom. This embodied awareness allows them to make decisions from a place of integrated knowing rather than mental analysis alone. They can feel into the energy of potential choices and sense which path serves their highest good. They no longer need to explain or justify their intuitive choices to others because they have learned to trust the intelligence of their own system. I remember working with a businessman who had always considered himself practical and logical, dismissive of what he called touchy-feely nonsense. Yet he had sought therapy because his relationships were failing and his health was declining. Through our work, he discovered that he was actually highly empathic, but had suppressed this aspect of himself in order to succeed in a competitive corporate environment. As he began to acknowledge and honor his empathic abilities, remarkable changes occurred. He could sense the true motivations behind business proposals, detect dishonesty in negotiations, and predict team dynamics with uncanny accuracy. What he once dismissed as irrelevant became his greatest professional asset. He transformed from someone who feared his sensitivity to someone who wielded it as a strategic advantage. As the transformation continues, the warrior empath begins to attract different types of relationships and opportunities. The energy vampires and emotional parasites that once surrounded them begin to fall away, unable to find purchase on their newly fortified boundaries. In their place come individuals who match their vibration of conscious empowerment, people who can meet them as equals rather than seeking them as saviors. These new relationships are characterized by reciprocity, respect, and genuine intimacy. Both parties give and receive in a natural flow that nourishes rather than depletes. The warrior empath no longer needs to dim their light to make others comfortable, nor do they need to amplify it to gain attention or approval. They simply shine at their natural frequency and trust that those who are meant to be in their orbit will be drawn by authentic resonance rather than unconscious need.
The quality of these evolved relationships differs markedly from the empath's previous experiences. Where once there was drama and intensity born of dysfunction, now there is depth and meaning born of authenticity. Where once there was the exhausting dance of rescuer and victim, now there is the graceful exchange of mutual support and challenge. The warrior empath also develops a unique relationship with conflict. Rather than avoiding it at all costs, as they did in their earlier incarnation, they learn to engage with conflict as an opportunity for clarity and growth. They no longer sacrifice their truth on the altar of peace, because they understand that false peace built on suppressed truth is ultimately more destructive than honest confrontation. When the warrior empath engages in conflict, they do so from a place of centered power rather than reactive emotion. They can hold their ground without becoming rigid, speak their truth without attacking the other, and maintain their integrity without destroying relationships. They have learned the difference between being aggressive and being assertive, between being passive
and being peaceful. This mastery of conflict serves them not only in personal relationships, but in all areas of life. They become natural leaders because they can navigate difficult conversations and complex group dynamics with skill and wisdom. They can hold space for others' emotions without being overwhelmed by them. They can facilitate healing and resolution because they are no longer afraid of discomfort or tension. The development of this conflict mastery often begins with the empath's relationship to their own internal conflicts. For years, they may have suppressed their own anger, their own disappointment, their own needs in order to maintain the illusion of harmony. The warrior phase requires them to befriend these disowned aspects of themselves, to give voice to the parts that have been silenced. I have seen empaths weep with relief when they finally allow themselves to feel and express their anger at years of mistreatment. This anger is not destructive, it is liberating. It burns away the false narratives that kept them trapped in cycles of self-sacrifice. It clears space for their authentic power to emerge. The warrior empath understands that their role is not to fix or save everyone they encounter, but to be a catalyst for others' own awakening. They become living examples of what is possible when sensitivity is paired with strength, when compassion is balanced with discernment, when love is grounded in wisdom. They no longer give advice unless it is specifically requested, and even then, they offer it as an invitation rather than a prescription. They trust others' capacity to find their own answers and make their own choices, even when those choices lead to pain or difficulty. This is not coldness, but true compassion, the kind that honors the sovereignty of each soul's journey. This shift from rescuer to catalyst represents a fundamental maturation in the empath's understanding of service. They learn that true help is often the refusal to help, that genuine love sometimes requires allowing others to face their own consequences, that real support means believing in others' strength rather than focusing on their weakness. In the deepest phase of the transformation, the warrior empath begins to serve as a bridge between worlds. They can translate the language of the heart for those who have forgotten how to feel, and the language of power for those who have never learned to protect themselves. They become interpreters of the human experience, helping others understand the hidden dynamics that shape their lives. This service is not performed out of obligation or the need to be needed, but from a genuine desire to contribute to the healing and awakening of consciousness on the planet. The warrior empath understands that their personal transformation is not just for their own benefit, but part of a larger evolutionary process that is occurring within humanity itself. They begin to see their empathic gifts not as a burden to be managed, but as a sacred calling to participate in the great work of consciousness evolution. They understand that the world needs those who can feel deeply and think clearly, who can love unconditionally and act decisively, who can hold both shadow and light in perfect balance. The warrior empath becomes a guardian of the sacred, protecting not only their own energy and well-being, but serving as a protector for others who are still learning to protect themselves. They can sense when someone is being manipulated or abused, and they have the courage to speak up or intervene when appropriate. But they do so from wisdom rather than reactivity, understanding that true protection sometimes means allowing others to experience the consequences of their choices rather than rescuing them from those consequences. They have learned the difference between enabling and empowering, between helping and hindering, between love and attachment. The emergence of this protective instinct often surprises empaths who have spent years being passive or accommodating. They discover a fierce love within themselves, not just for others, but for life itself, for truth, for justice. This fierceness is not anger, but clarity, not aggression, but strength, not violence, but the refusal to allow violation. I have witnessed empaths transform into powerful advocates for those who cannot advocate for themselves. They become voices for the voiceless, protectors of the vulnerable, warriors for justice. But they engage in this work from a place of overflowing strength rather than depleted martyrdom, from choice rather than compulsion, from love rather than guilt. As the transformation reaches completion, the warrior empath embodies what I call the integrated self. They are no longer split between their sensitive nature and their need for protection. They have found a way to be both open and boundaried, both loving and discerning, both gentle and fierce. They have learned to shape-shift between different aspects of their nature as the situation requires. In their presence, others feel both completely safe and completely seen. They create an energy field that is simultaneously nurturing and empowering, healing and challenging. They hold space for others to be fully themselves while modeling what it looks like to be fully integrated and authentically powerful. This integrated presence has a quality that is immediately recognizable, yet difficult to describe. There is a stillness about the warrior empath, a rootedness that cannot be shaken by external storms. There is also a luminosity, a clarity that cuts through illusion and pretense. People feel both comfortable and slightly off balance in their presence. Comfortable because they sense no judgment or agenda. Off balance because the warrior empath's authenticity highlights their own masks and defenses. The warrior empath has learned that true strength is not the absence of vulnerability, but the capacity to be vulnerable from a place of centeredness and choice, rather than compulsion and unconsciousness. They can open their heart without losing their mind, feel their emotions without being controlled by them, and share their gifts without depleting their resources.
They understand that vulnerability is not weakness, but courage. The courage to be seen fully, to love completely, to risk disappointment in service of connection. But their vulnerability is now conscious, chosen, boundaried. They know when to open and when to close, when to share and when to withhold, when to trust and when to protect. This mastery of vulnerable strength becomes one of their greatest gifts to others. In a world that confuses vulnerability with victimhood, openness with naivety, sensitivity with weakness, the warrior empath demonstrates that these qualities can coexist with power, wisdom, and fierce protection of what is sacred. The transformation also brings with it a new understanding of time and energy as sacred resources. The warrior empath becomes highly selective about how they invest these precious commodities. They no longer say yes to everything and everyone, understanding that every yes to one thing is a no to something else. They develop what I call sacred selfishness, the practice of honoring their own needs as sacred rather than selfish. This reorientation toward their own needs often triggers guilt and shame in empaths who have been conditioned to believe that self-care is selfish. They must learn to distinguish between healthy self-regard and narcissistic self-absorption, between appropriate self-protection and cruel indifference to others' pain. The warrior empath develops sophisticated discernment about when their helping serves the highest good and when it actually enables dysfunction. They ask themselves crucial questions before offering assistance. Am I helping from overflow or deficit? Am I solving a problem that belongs to someone else? Am I preventing someone from learning a lesson they need to learn? Am I acting from love or from guilt? This discernment extends to their choice of companions, projects, and purposes. The warrior empath becomes highly selective about their associations, understanding that they are influenced by the energy of those around them. They seek out relationships and environments that support their continued growth rather than pull them back into old patterns of depletion and self-sacrifice. The development of this selectivity often involves a period of what I call sacred loneliness.
As the warrior empath raises their standards for how they allow themselves to be treated, many relationships naturally fall away. This can be a period of grief and disorientation as they mourn the loss of connection, even when that connection was ultimately harmful. But this loneliness is fertile rather than barren. It is the space in which the empath's true self can finally emerge without the distorting influence of others' needs and expectations. In this solitude, they discover interests and passions that may have been buried for years. They remember dreams they had abandoned. They reconnect with aspects of themselves that were sacrificed on the altar of relationship maintenance. This is the silent transformation that turns empaths into warriors. Not warriors who fight against life, but warriors who fight for life, for truth, for consciousness, for the sacred right of every being to exist in their full power and authenticity. They become guardians of the flame of human potential, protectors of the sacred spark that exists in every soul. The warrior empath learns to see through the illusions that keep humanity trapped in cycles of unconsciousness and suffering. They can perceive the hidden dynamics in families, organizations, and communities that create dysfunction and pain. But rather than becoming cynical or despairing at these revelations, they use their understanding to navigate these systems with wisdom and to help others do the same. They become natural healers, not through taking on others' pain, but by maintaining such a high vibration of health and wholeness that others are naturally uplifted in their presence. They heal by example rather than effort, by being rather than doing, by radiating the energy of integration rather than trying to fix what is broken in others. In the end, the warrior empath understands that their greatest victory is not over any external enemy, but over the forces within themselves that would keep them small, silent, and self-sacrificing. They have won the ultimate battle, the battle for their own soul, and in doing so, they have become beacons of possibility for all who encounter them. They stand as living proof that sensitivity and strength are not opposites, but allies, that empathy and empowerment can coexist, that it is possible to care deeply for others while caring supremely for oneself. This is the warrior's gift to the world, the demonstration that another way is possible, that transformation is real, and that even the most wounded among us can become the most powerful when we learn to alchemize our pain into wisdom, our wounds into weapons of healing, and our sensitivity into sacred strength. The warrior empath walks among us, often unrecognized but never unfelt. They are the ones who have learned to love without losing themselves, to give without being depleted, to feel without drowning. They are the silent guardians of human consciousness, the bridges between worlds, the translators of the heart's deepest language. And if you have recognized yourself in these words, if something within you has stirred in response to this description, know that your own transformation may already be beginning. The path of the warrior empath is not easy, but it is sacred. It requires courage, commitment, and the willingness to face everything you have been taught about what it means to be sensitive in this world. The journey demands that you question the very foundations of your identity, that you challenge the beliefs that have kept you trapped in cycles of giving and depletion, that you dare to imagine yourself as powerful rather than powerless, as a warrior rather than a victim, as a force for conscious change rather than a passive absorber of others' dysfunction. But the rewards are beyond measure. To live as a warrior empath is to experience the full spectrum of human consciousness while maintaining your center. To love with the intensity of 1,000 suns while remaining unburned by the heat. To serve the highest good while honoring your own sacred needs. To feel everything deeply while drowning in nothing. This is your invitation, your calling, your destiny,
if you choose to accept it. The transformation awaits, silent but inevitable, ready to turn your greatest sensitivity into your most powerful strength. The warrior within you is stirring, waiting for the moment when you will finally say yes to your own power, when you will stop hiding behind the comfortable mask of victimhood and step into the fierce grace of conscious warriorhood. The time is now. The transformation is calling. Will you answer?